See all the weather than what we had earlier in the week. I must confess I'm a little disappointed. All the good weather's when I'm working, all the bad weather's when I'm off. But it is what it is. All right, we'll pick back up in Acts chapter 6 where we left off last week. We spent the last two Sundays discussing verse number 1. We're going to spend most of today probably in verse number 2. But we'll definitely move on from verse number 1. So in those days, as the number of disciples was multiplying, there arose a complaint by the Hellenistic Jews against the Hebraic Jews that their widows were being overlooked in the daily distribution. And we talked about what that means and the fact that God has always cared about widows back from the oldest Old Testament times up until now. That is a great concern for him. So we pick up in verse 2 after the apostles had gotten the complaint. Now I take these first 7 verses more as a lesson in leadership than I do in anything else. Because this is how we are to respond when we have complaints arise. Has there ever been a complaint in this church? 2 maybe? 3? 300, somewhere in there, They come up, don't they? Anytime you have a group of people together and that spend a lot of time together as church people do, there's bound to be some issues arise. There's bound to be some complaints. And so we're going to see here how the apostles handle this first episode in the church where there's a complaint arise. So what do you do when a complaint arises as a leader? So we try to find a solution, don't we? So we have to think about several things when we get a complaint. Number 1, is the complaint legitimate? Because we never make a complaint that's not legitimate, do we? I hope you picked up on the sarcasm there. Because there are complaints that are not reasonable, correct? We've all seen that. We see that all the time in our daily lives. So we have to decide if the complaint is legitimate. Then we have to decide if it is legitimate, is it something that we can address? Maybe it's a complaint that we can't do anything about. Maybe it's about the poor quality of the road between here and 71. We have no control over that. We can't fix that. Maybe it's a complaint about the cost of the utility bills. Not much we can do about that, So is it something we can legitimately act on? And then how urgently do we need to act on it? Because sometimes, we need to address a complaint, but it doesn't need to be done in the moment. I went to a conference for elders here a couple years ago, and one of the things that the gentleman teaching the class I was sitting in on said, make it a point to prioritize. Because you'll get these 2 a.m. phone calls from couples that are having a fight or from someone that's been arrested. Those things happen. Is it something that needs to be addressed right now? He gave the example that a lady from the church had called because her husband had broken their TV during one of their fights. He put his fist through the TV or something, broke the TV. He decided that was something that could wait till the next day. He asked her, are you in danger? Do you feel afraid for your safety? She said no. Is everything under control? Yeah, everything's under control. But you need to do something about him breaking our TV. And he said, well, why don't you come to the office tomorrow morning about 9 o'clock and we'll figure this out. That's not something that he prioritized because there was no safety problem involved. If we get a complaint that the preacher is having an affair with a member of the church, how soon do we respond to that? We do that immediately, don't we? We immediately find out whether it's true or not. And if it is true, then we take immediate action. Is one of the elders involved in a child trafficking ring? That's an immediate response, isn't it? We turn them over to the authorities and we cut ties. That's an immediate response. So how urgently do we act on these items? Apparently they considered this to be pretty urgent, didn't they? Because they acted immediately and came up with an immediate response. Do we just wait to see if someone will step up without our intervention? Sometimes that happens. People will step up to meet a need and to address a complaint that don't really require us to get involved. If we do decide to act, do we do this ourselves or do we ask others to do it? Is this something that I need to take care of, Lowell?
The first step is you approach the person that has the issue. You do it personally.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So is it, the two that have the issue with each other need to talk. That's Matthew 15. But if there's a legitimate complaint and it's risen to the level of the elders, what do we do? And in this case, it was not so much a dispute between parties as it was a logistical problem. This was a logistical nightmare trying to manage the church at this early stage of development. Because we're talking about thousands of people coming to Christ. How would this church handle if we got an influx of 1,000 new members? It wouldn't be easy, would it? Melding and merging all those different personalities and desires and priorities, and it would be difficult, to say the least.
Those who converted on Pentecost, they come all over everywhere.
Sure.
Reluctant to leave Jerusalem because of the church back home.
Right.
Any mechanism of support where they came from. So they wanted to hang around Jerusalem, but then they didn't have any jobs.
Right.
People were needing help.
They were needing help. And this is all just like I said, for a church leader, this is like a doomsday scenario, because how do you manage all of this? And if we decide that we can't handle it ourselves, is one person enough to oversee the problem and correct the issue we're having, or do we need more than one? These are all questions that the apostles had to think about when they met to discuss this situation. How to best take care of the widows that were involved in the church in this early time. And then once you've decided how many, who are you going to get? Who are you going to bring forward to take care of these situations? So this is a model that we still try to follow today, don't we? We still try to follow this. The elders in this church make decisions, and we inform the church of those decisions. Now, do we tell you every time we pay a bill? We don't tell you when we update software, replace computers, make repairs to the heat and air system. We don't bring that stuff to you guys. That's not something you need to be involved in. Preacher search that we're in the middle of right now, sure, we involve you guys. We try to keep you informed. When there's news, we share it because this is an important thing. If it was one of those things where you guys agreed with everything we did and all that would be great. But sometimes we make decisions that you may not understand or that you may not agree with. Lowell's making a face like that's never happened here.
Oh, no.
But, it happens. It does. And so what are the responsibilities of both parties? It's your responsibility to come and ask us. We'll tell you. We'll share whatever information needs to be shared. It's our responsibility to listen and to understand where you're coming from and to explain why maybe we didn't go this route and we went this direction instead. It's communication on both sides, isn't it? And that's one of the things that we sometimes struggle with is effective communication. I have never said anything that Melissa misunderstood. Do you think that's a true saying? No, not at all. It's usually on a daily basis that I say something that she misunderstands. And vice versa. There are things that she says that I don't take the way I should take it, or that I fail to understand what she's saying. So it's a communication thing. What now? I wasn't listening. We talk about the importance of listening and how we need to be an active listener and be involved in the conversation. For those of us that have attention deficit issues, that's a challenge now. You know, because my mind is going 30 different directions over here when you're talking to me over here, and sometimes I don't get it. So I apologize in advance if that happens. But that's part of communication. It's part of being alive. So in this situation here, the apostles realized that the needs of the church had outgrown their ability to effectively oversee it. Okay? So how many people can one person oversee? Not a huge number. I don't know enough military to know how many are under the command of a single person, but it's not that many, 20, 30, maybe 50. And then you start elevating chains of command and things like that. But we're talking about thousands. And we're talking about trying to meet the logistical needs of thousands of people. The apostles' priority was and should have been preaching the gospel, right? That's exactly what they need to be focused on. How many, and this is something I've really come to think about really over the last 10 years or so. It's when I was young and infallible, I didn't think this way. But when we're trying to do stuff, how good can we really be at how many different things? I mean, if you want to be really good at something, how many other things are you going to be really good at? Not many, is there? You've heard the phrase, jack of all trades, master of none, and that's true. There's only so many things that we can devote a significant portion of our attention to before something starts to suffer. And so that's where the apostles were here at this point. They were at that point where their attention was being pulled in so many different ways that they weren't able to do what they really needed to do, which was preaching the word. So we're going to see them select good men here to assist them in the day-to-day operation of the church. The King James Version says the apostles shouldn't serve tables. The Holman Christian says they shouldn't handle financial matters. I'm not sure why the difference in translation. The literal translation is serve tables. So I agree with the King James more in this particular instance. The church needed men who could make sure things were being done correctly and equitably in the day-to-day operation of the church. Now you notice I didn't say equally. I said equitably. Because one person's needs is not the same as another person. And so maybe this person needs more financial help and this one needs more clothes. Or maybe this one needs more food and this one needs shelter. So the needs were different. But the job that these guys were going to be charged with is making sure that the needs of the widows were being met. Whatever those needs were, that they were being met, and that there wasn't favoritism of the Hebraic Jews versus the Hellenistic Jews, that everyone was being treated equitably. The word for serve or handle here is the Greek word. Can you read Greek there? I can't either. Diakoneo. So where does this word figure in heavily elsewhere? Think about 1 Timothy 3 and the office of deacon. It's the exact same word that is used in 1 Timothy 3 to describe the office of deacon. But we also see it translated here 40 different times. It's translated ministered in 14 of those, minister in 8. So 22 of the 40 times it's translated minister, which is also to what? Serve. It's also to serve. So it's translated serve 7 more times. So that's 29 out of the 40. Administered is 2. Deacon is 2. Office is 2. Serve is another 2. Ministering is another 1. Served is another one. So when we look at the role that these people were to play, that these guys were to play in the early church, it was that of a servant. And that's exactly what we are all to be today, isn't it? We're all to be servants and to serve one another. If you look at Thayer's definition, it means to be a servant or attendant, to serve or wait upon, to minister to one, to be served or ministered unto, to wait at a table and offer food and drink to the guests. It's talked of women preparing food, to take care of the poor and sick, who administer the office of a deacon in Christian churches, to serve as deacons, to minister. So this is where we get some people saying that this is the appointing of the first deacons. And I'm going to tell you, there's people that argue this ad nauseum. Some people say this was not the first deacons, that the office of deacon didn't come until later in the church, and that because of that, these were not deacons. Frankly, I don't care. You know, if you want to say this was the first deacons, fine. If you want to say it was just 7 men chosen to help the apostles, then that's fine. I don't care about labels. Go ahead, Lowell.
Wasn't the population of Christians at this time somewhere between 6,000 and 12,000? And because they counted men, they didn't count women, and more than likely a family, they would be involved. But when you think about the challenge here of possibly 12,000, imagine the problem that Moses had before he chose others.
Well, sure, you know.
1 million people, wasn't it, or so?
Yeah, you know, we didn't have a population count, but it was hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
You know, so not everyone can do everything. You know, that's something that as leaders we have to come to understand at some point in our leadership roles, is that we just can't do it all. You know, it's hard to understand that sometimes. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to think about in that particular thing there. So think about this and think about how, as a church functions, how important it is to have people to fill this role of servant. Whether they hold the title or not, whether they are in the position of a deacon or not, how important is it that we have people who are willing to serve? When we get through with verse 6 down here, I'll tell you exactly what I think, because that's in my note on verse 6. But be thinking about that, how important it is for people who are willing to serve and to help in the everyday functions of the church. Verse 3. Therefore, yeah.
You know, sometimes the church referred to as a church family, which we are.
Sure.
And if in your family the challenges aren't taken care of, the family falls apart.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that would happen in the church too. If you don't have people that serve and take care of the things that need taken care of, I don't think it'll last.
Well, it won't. And I think that's why you see them act with such urgency here. Because this was a dispute that was rising, and when you have people take a side, then what does that do? That splits your group. So we're looking at a potential split of the church here before it even really gets off of the ground if the apostles don't act. Because it was going to go that way. The non-Hebraic Jews were going to support their widows, and the Hebrew Jews were going to support their widows, and it was a diverging path. So the apostles did have to act here with some urgency to address this, so that that can't happen. You know, that I don't think we can underestimate the importance or overestimate the importance of maintaining unity. I just don't think it's possible to overestimate that importance. And so what they're doing here is acting to maintain unity. And so when we see things that happen within the church, whether it's here in our church or in other churches, what's the one thing that needs to happen right away? We need to act to maintain unity if at all possible. Sometimes things are out of our control. But if it's within our control, we need to get that unity back and to maintain that unity. So verse 3. The apostles came together and decided this is how we're going to address this. This is what we're going to do to meet this need. Therefore, brothers, select from among you 7 men. Nothing magical about the number 7, except that it means complete. The Jew placed a high priority on that. Doesn't mean so much today, but 7 men. And what are these men supposed to be like? They're supposed to be someone everyone respects, aren't they? So we got 7 guys that are going to be listed down here in verse 5. But these are to be 7 men of good reputation. So what does it mean to have a good reputation? It means everyone likes you. You've never met anyone mad in your life, and everyone thinks you're this perfect individual, right? Doesn't mean that, does it? It means you're well respected. You look hard enough, probably wouldn't take a lot of looking. You're going to find people that don't like me. Okay? I know it's hard to believe, but you'll find them. It'll be people I've made mad in the clinic, fellow employees that I've irritated or counseled. You'll find people that don't like me. You'll find people that don't like Dad. Dad ever have to fire someone? Yep. Did he ever have to paddle someone? Many times. Not all of those people really like him. Does that disqualify us from leadership? No. Lowell?
When we were building this building, there were several people that your dad had paddled. And they expressed great respect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Surprising.
I've run into that as patients come into my office. Because there'll be some people that are from Greenwood, and I'll know them, and they'll all make the comment, yeah, he paddled me a whole bunch. That happens. But, you look for people that you respect. How quickly does respect come? It takes time, doesn't it? Now, there's not a magic amount of time, but it takes time. It takes some consistency of being a quote-unquote good guy. It takes knowing them for a while. I had a young man one time, he's no longer here, but he asked me what it took to be considered for the position of deacon. And I said, patience. I said, it takes time for us to get to know you, to see a pattern of behavior, to develop a sense of respect. So when the time is right, then we consider. But we have to wait until the time is right. So these guys were people that were of good reputation. So it means that the people that chose them had known them for a while, doesn't it? Had known them long enough to get a good sense of respect, to know what kind of person they were, and to know that they would do the job that was assigned to them. So they chose people of good reputation, and then they were full of the Spirit and wisdom. How do you know how smart a person is? By listening when they open their mouth, right? By hearing what they have to say. By seeing how they live their lives. Are they out there causing problems every night of the week? Are they routinely 30 minutes late to work because they're hungover? You develop this pattern and this sense of them. You're not going to know if they have a lot of wisdom until you talk to them for a while. Is there a difference between book smarts and wisdom? Yeah, there's a big difference, isn't there? There's a difference between book smarts and common sense. Big difference. David?
Among the several thousand people we're talking about, how many people did they charge for this obligation?
7.
How many people did they charge for the obligation of finding these?
Oh, every one of them. Yeah.
How would you reckon that?
And that's something else we need to talk about, isn't it? I've got it in my notes somewhere. But how easy is it to get a group of 10 or 20 to agree to something? How hard would it be to get a group of 6,000 or 7,000 to agree to something? We have no record of that if they did. Yeah. Somehow they got together and decided, didn't they? So
Apparently they did pretty, we don't know exactly.
Mhm.
fairly soon.
Yeah, it didn't take months or years to decide, did it? They decided pretty quickly. So they had to use some criterion. I don't know if they had a committee of committees that oversaw this process and chose who they were going to choose. Do you think maybe there were some people offended that they were left out? Do you think maybe there were some people who were offended that their husband or brother was left out, or father? Nod your head. Yeah, there would have been. You know, so we don't know all the ins and outs of that. We don't have any of that stuff recorded. But when you choose 7 out of a group of thousands, there's going to be some people offended. And you just have to deal with it. But they chose these guys that were full of the Spirit and wisdom, who they can appoint to this duty. So you look for the right person, you look for the right fit, someone that's capable of handling the task that's set before them, and that you know is going to do what they've been asked to do. You ever ask someone to do something and then it doesn't happen? You know? It happens. I've been guilty of it, I know. It just does. It happens. But these were guys that they felt like they could count on to do what they were asked to do. So in verse 4, what are the apostles going to do instead? Instead of overseeing this distribution to the widows and serving those that are in need, what are they going to do instead?
Praying and preaching.
They're going to devote themselves to prayer and preaching now, which is, I don't want to say more important, but you can't prioritize everything, right? I mean, I can't prioritize going to work and then spending another 40 hours a week doing something else. I mean, something's going to have to be lesser. Something's going to have to take first priority. Something's going to have to take second priority. Something's going to have to be third place. So the apostles here have decided to devote themselves to prayer and teaching just as we were supposed to do, or as they were supposed to do. You know, sometimes, and I think probably the apostles suffered from this some, in this situation in particular, but sometimes we just tool along and we see something needs to be done, okay, I'll do that. And then you tool along some more and, oh, this other thing needs to be done. Yeah, I can do that too. And before we know it, we've got more responsibilities than we can handle. We've taken on more than we can chew. And that's something that leaders tend to do, isn't it? Because we want to fix things. Leaders typically are type A personalities who don't like a problem that can't be fixed. If there's something that needs to be fixed, we want to get in there and we want to fix that. But sometimes we don't realize the burden we place on ourselves. And the fact that sometimes we don't do as well with any of it as we could if we would limit our focus and prioritize the tasks that are before us. So that's something I've been trying to work on, and that I'm going to continue to have to work on, because I see something needs to be fixed. I just want to go do it. You know, it's easier for me to just handle it than to let someone else do it. It just is. But sometimes those responsibilities can become unmanageable. There were some things that really only the apostles could do, wasn't there? This teaching and preaching stuff, they had the knowledge, didn't they? They had the gift of the Holy Spirit that was telling them what to say. Not everyone had that ability. So sometimes we come to understand that we're trying to do too much, trying to handle everything ourselves. And so we need someone, we need to come to that realization ourselves, or we need someone around us that's going to give us a good swift kick in the pants and say, back off, because we can't handle it all. Now, I think this is a situation that the apostles found themselves in. Legitimately trying to do good and trying to do everything that needed to be done. And it just became more than they could do, more than they could handle. And it took someone coming to them and saying, this is being overlooked. We need to do something about this in order for it to change. And so that's sometimes what we need to do with our leaders, isn't it? We need to sometimes refocus them on what they need to be doing. Sometimes we're the ones that need to return to our roots and focus on the things at which we excel. All right, so let's talk about this, things that we excel at for a minute. So we're commanded not to be prideful, correct? We're commanded not to be prideful. We shouldn't have this huge ego that fills the room, right? But is it wrong to recognize when you have something you do well? It's not. There's a difference between understanding that you do something well and thinking that you do everything well and that you're the only one that can do something. So it's okay for us to understand and realize that we do well at certain things. Sometimes we do better than we think we do at it. Sometimes we do worse than we think we do at it. But it's okay for us to understand that we are good at what we do and to use those strengths and those talents in the service of God. So if there's something that you do well that could be of service to God, then I would encourage you to use that. Understand what you're good at. Understand at what areas you excel. And then use that in God's service. This assignment will take oversight, won't it? There's going to be a learning curve for these 7 guys, isn't there? They're not going to come into this and have it running smoothly within 24 hours. It's going to take some time. It's going to take some work. It's going to take some mentoring. Teaching someone how to do things and then letting them do it is the essence of nurturing and training professionals or leaders. There's a big debate over whether leaders are born or whether they're trained. I'm not going to take a survey here of who thinks what, because I come down in the middle. Surprise, surprise. I think there are some leaders that are born leaders. You look at any elementary school class, there's going to be someone that's the leader of that class. For good or bad, they're going to either lead that classroom into trouble or they're going to lead that classroom into doing the right thing. You see it on the elementary playgrounds all the time. Mark, go ahead.
I'm wondering in verse 6, how much of the laying on of their hands on them, how much could be filled with the Spirit of laying on.
So that's a good question, isn't it? And we need to talk about that laying on of hands in verse 6. But there is something to be said for that. And there's probably a gift of the Holy Spirit that allowed them to improve even beyond what they were already capable of. But they wouldn't have even been considered for it if they weren't already good at it. They wouldn't have risen to the top of the list.
Verse 3 states that they were full of the Spirit.
Sure, yeah. They were full of Spirit even before they were chosen. So there's leaders that are born. I mean, we see it from an early age in some of these kids. But we also teach it, don't we? We also teach people how to be effective leaders. How many books have been written on becoming an effective leader? Millions, you know? Big books, thick books of how to be an effective leader. Are there leadership training programs in colleges? You betcha. There are leadership training programs in colleges. There are leadership training programs in churches for kids, too. We need to train these leaders. We need to train people to do what it is we ask them to do. So if I come to you and ask you to do something and I don't tell you how to do that or teach you how to do that, I haven't done my job as a leader. And that's something that we probably need to improve on as a church. Make sure that we train people to do what we ask them to do. We should be empowering and encouraging those that have the potential to help in some way. So I don't set goals. I'm not a big goal person. But this is one thing I want to do better at. I want to do better at empowering and encouraging those with potential. Because that's an important way to grow Christ Church. Because what are we going to see down here after they do this? In verse 7. This is a key thing that we as leaders need to learn. The preaching about God flourished. The number of disciples in Jerusalem multiplied greatly. So what was the result of the apostles spreading out of the leadership responsibilities? The church grew. And it didn't just grow, it grew greatly because they spread out the responsibility and got people doing things that they were capable of doing. So this is like I said, this entire section to me, at this point in my life, is a section on leadership and making sure we do the right things. Well,
You know, I was thinking what you said about teaching leaders to be leaders. If those leaders don't step forward, or if those participants don't step forward, they'll never be able to.
right,
They have to show themselves willing to do something to begin with.
right. So we have people that are reluctant leaders, don't we? They're doing it because there's really no other alternative. And we have other leaders that step into it because they're aware enough to know that they can do it well. It really takes both. You know, particularly in a smaller church, you're going to have people that are leading because they need to lead. But then you may have in larger churches those that step into the leadership roles because not only do they know they're capable of it, but everyone around them knows that they're capable of it. And so we just have to focus and think about this some. Think about what it means to be a leader. Think about what it means to grow leadership and to lead in a group organization such as a church. The leadership qualities desired by humanity in the workplace are very similar to the leadership qualities we need in the church. Now, we see leaders in the workplace that micromanage and run people off. We don't want that in the church. We see leaders in the workplace that are cruel to their employees, that make them work when they're sick, that make them do things that they shouldn't be doing. We don't want those kinds of leaders in the church. We want the kinds of leaders that we're seeing here with the apostles that are addressing needs and encouraging people to do what they can do and for lack of a better word, drafting the help, getting people out there that will do it. So verse 5, the proposal pleased the whole company. So they chose 7 men. And we're not going to have time to talk about all 7 of these guys today. Speaking of First Bell. But they chose Stephen. Okay, now we're going to see Stephen heavily at the end of chapter 6 and into chapter 7. And we're going to see him martyred for the faith. We're going to see Stephen heavily. We're going to see Philip. This is Philip the evangelist, not Philip the apostle. But we'll see him later in the book of Acts. We'll know a little bit about him. Prochorus, Nicanor, Timon, Parmenas. You know anything about those guys? I know very little about those guys. Almost nothing. And nothing of any certainty. And then Nicholas, a proselyte from Antioch. So, who were these 7 guys? What can we learn from these 7 guys as we look at their lives and what they were called to do? We're going to look at Stephen. And like I said, we'll spend a lot of time talking about him over the next chapter and a half. So we won't spend a lot of time on him right now. We'll see Philip later on in the book of Acts. But these 4 guys, Prochorus, Nicanor, Timon, and Parmenas, we know nothing about those guys. Do we have people in the church that serve that no one really knows that are serving? Sure we do, don't we? Do we have people fulfilling the role of servant that don't have an office or a title? Absolutely. So this is where I told you that my opinion on folks like this comes into play. Let me get all the way down here. In my view, there are no words to describe the importance of these people in the kingdom of God. Because there are people like this in this room right now that serve without their recognition and serve without anyone else knowing about it, because that's what God has called us to do. So we'll talk about that a little bit more next week and about the other guys that were chosen here of these 7. Thank you for your time and attention.